Welcome back to The Live Life, part 2 of our conversation with Lindsay Grinstead and Bill Boris-Schacter of the Tonic Consulting Group. I am your host, Wallace Johnson, where you can find me on Twitter at WallaceCTS. In part 1 of our conversation, we talked about the foundation of setting up your creative team. And in this continuation of our conversation, we're going to cover the best practices on gaining experience as a creative service provider, setting your pricing structure, and the mindset of the customer when selecting a creative partner. We pick up with me asking Bill about tactics on how to gain experience as a creative service provider. So without further ado, part 2.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by Middle Atlantic. What great systems are built on.
This is The Live Life, episode 32, an agency approach to creative services for live events, part 2. So I want to get a little tactical now in terms of maybe some of the nuts and bolts things that either companies, again, who are looking to expand in creative services or companies who are offering creative services but trying to grow. And that is the experience factor. You know, at some point, you know, if you're offering a new service or you've offered a service and you're trying to expand it, it's kind of a startup mentality, right? You have nothing at this point, or you only have a little bit, but you want to show that you can do more. In the past, I've seen clients do this on the technology side where, hey, we got this new projector, but we need to get it out there. So, you know, let's give it, you know, super cheap or free on a couple of shows to get it out there to where we get some experience, but we also show that it was out there. Is this a good approach, or what other approaches could companies take to kind of showcase what their capabilities are from a creative agency aspect?
Well, coming from operations, free is never a good approach.
The salespeople love it, though.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, that's always the tension, isn't it? Let's give it away. No, you can't. What you really want to try and do is to show that you are a partner to your clients. And I think the best way to do that is to understand that there is a investment that your client is making if they're interested in this new technology or new service, or if they're interested in, you know, leaving an incumbent and coming to you as a new vendor, as a new partner. And recognizing that investment and adjusting your pricing as a result of that investment is totally appropriate. I would never encourage anybody just to give anything away for free. If you have an ongoing relationship with an account that is giving you a lot of money and you want to do value-added stuff and do it for free, that's fine. That would be something that I could see as a way of enhancing the relationship that you have and ensuring that relationship continues. But if you're trying to break in and you do something for free, they're going to expect it for free the next time and the next time. And you're in a problem situation. And you're also, I think, denigrating the value of your brand, because you're saying, yeah, you know, it's valuable, but we'll give it away for free. It's not a good policy.
The one thing I would add to that is as these staging companies or production companies are looking to get into the creative space, and again, I'm using that term very broadly, yep. There will be times that you might have to be proactive with clients or potential clients and make a bit of an investment from in ideating new ideas or ideating creative. So I'm not saying, again, that you would then go execute that for free. And I'm not saying they would be fully baked ideas, but in the creative space, if you're trying to showcase your thinking or, you know, your big picture thoughts or the way you can strategize and ideate, you might have to proactively develop things to take to clients or prospects that you know, it would be a bit of an investment on the upfront.
Yeah, and you know, one approach that's worked well for myself back on that side is, you know, as you're trying to ideate and showcase, involve the customer, you know, make them part of the process, come up with a value of what you think that would be, Should somebody have to pay for it, make sure the client understands what that value is. So, hey, next year, if you actually want this, because this works, then this is what it will cost versus, like you say, presenting it as a free. They understand the full process of what you're trying to accomplish. So,
Yeah, that's a really great point, Wallace. Just, all about that communication and transparency with your clients, and not doing something in a vacuum, but developing something with them, and then they're more invested in it as well.
No, and it circles back to your point of, if you're looking at offering a new service or expanding it to a service, how does it affect your existing customers? And so when, you're talking to your customers and making them part of the process, that seems to all work out in that manner.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So pricing. This is a tough one because in the equipment world, you can shop what a rental projector price is from a lot of companies. And then you have wholesalers who re-rent other companies, and you could come off with a margin structure off of that. But with creative, it's, a lot about time and effort. So how should companies go about coming up with a price structure for their services?
So this could be a whole nother program too. I mean, pricing is an art and a science, and it's a combination of the two that really has to have a lot of analysis and a lot of thought in order to make it work. But at the same time, when you're dealing with creatives, it's really just more labor. It's just another body. You know how to price your head of audio or head of video or whatever it might be. You know how to price a technical director. A creative is similar to that type of big, broad thinker who's in charge of a lot of stuff. Probably more valuable than those folks to a certain degree. But depending upon what they do and who you're talking to and what your client values and what they want, you're going to have to temper that based upon what you think the market will bear and what you think a client will bear. There's an old adage in the agency world that you take a salary, you multiply it times 3, and that's your sell price. That came about a long time ago in like the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And it's really way too high at this point. It's probably closer to 2 times salary at this point, maybe a little bit more depending upon what organization you're dealing with and what your overhead is and things like that. So there's ways to analyze this whole thing to actually come up with a number that makes sense. Mm-hmm. But there's also, do you charge a flat fee versus do you charge an hourly rate? And there's a lot of advantages to a flat fee for both client and for organization, depending upon how you position it and how you calculate it. And so there's no quick answer here, other than to say that creative is a very valuable resource and not something that you should just treat as a value add or I'll throw that in. Being proactive is one thing, but when the client is asking you to do something, you need to figure out how to do it and what to make it look like and say and feel. That's really valuable, and you should charge appropriately for it.
No, and you threw out some good points there too, because in the equipment world, it used to be in terms of trying to get ROI on buying this projector. So 10 rentals, so take the purchase price divided by 10. So where you say take the salary, multiply it by 2. Those are some good models that companies who are just at least trying to start to figure out something can implement and use to figure out a price structure. Another point you made that I want to ask: flat price or hourly? What have you seen that's more common?
It's across the board. It's really been interesting for me. Transparency has been the buzzword for a long time. Procurement really likes transparency. Mm-hmm. I mean, clients that really just want to know, what am I going to get and how much is it going to cost? And they just like a good solid description and a dollar amount to it. So, part of that is partnering with your client and figuring out how do they want to see the pricing and what are they valuing versus what are they not valuing. And then that's the art of pricing versus the science. And the science being how many hours and what's it going to take to do it.
Yeah, Lindsay, I'll throw these next couple to you because that is the tricky part. I try to break it down to people simply to say, you got 2 companies that have bidding out how to build, to build a house.
Mm-hmm.
If one company comes to you and says, hey, they can do this in 6 months, from a time and effort standpoint, and it's going to cost this much, and the other company says, I can do this in 3 months from a time and effort standpoint, as a salesperson, how is it, what's the process to understand the time and effort approach and what you think maybe in the same market as a competitor? Or does it even matter? You just say, hey, this is what our company says is time and effort, and this is what we believe in what it will take. And if somebody says less, good for them. Like, what's the mentality when it comes to that part of the proposal process?
It's always such a tricky part of the proposal process. And I always advocated for, not to use the word again, but to be transparent in the process in terms of making sure you're being all inclusive. I never wanted to underbid just to win and then have to have all these project change notices at the end. And I know there are agencies out there that do that. And that's never sat well with me. It really wasn't Jack Morton's, mindset. I never saw us do that. And so it's really being thoughtful and working with your team and understanding like this is what it's going to take. And this is what it will cost. And obviously there's flexibility that you can build in. But I think it all comes back to really knowing your client, and even in a proposal process, being able to have the conversation so that you understand where do they fall on that spectrum, like Bill mentioned, of I just want a description and a price, or I want to see everything line itemed out, and understanding like what is their timeline and having those conversations of, well, we can do it in that amount of time, but then I'm going to have double the people on it, or it's going to, we're going to have people in overtime. So just the more you can educate a client so that they understand what they're looking at and what's driving the costs, the better off you'll be. Now, obviously in proposal situations, many times you can't have those conversations, but that then goes back to a really solid kind of go, no-go process. And if you aren't comfortable, or you think you're going to come in too high and you can't have those conversations with the client, it might not be worth your time to bid on the business. I mean, that's not a kind of blanket statement there, but I think it all kind of goes hand in hand with really understanding what it will take to get the project out the door, what it will cost, having those conversations with the client, and then evaluating if that's a piece of business that you should be going after. And there are going to be agencies out there who can do it cheaper and faster. Like it's going to happen. And if that's all the client wants, then maybe you're not the right fit for them either. If they're just price shopping, then maybe that's not the right relationship. But it's definitely a tricky situation, and you come across it all the time where your client calls and says, well, we got a bid that's 100,000 less. And, it's then up to the agency to decide, do we restructure what we do? Do we kind of backwards engineer what we've designed to fit this budget, or do we cut some things, or do we just do this just to win the business? Like there's so many factors that go into play, but knowing your client is that's obviously going to be my standpoint, like coming from the account side, like the more you know about the client, the better, and the more, the deeper and more kind of thoughtful and engaging conversations and educational conversations you can have with the client, the better off you'll be.
Yeah, no, that is so tough because and live event companies going through this, from the proposal and technology side now is that, you can't get certain information from the client and can't have a conversation about certain things, especially as these projects are growing and, you're doing large LED walls, but you want to have a conversation about content and what's going on. And you're doing video mapping, you want to talk about content and what's going on. And particularly, I guess, when it comes down to the creative component of a proposal, if you can't have a conversation about what's going on, then you got to make that tough decision to say, is this worth our time and effort to just put some information out there and hope we win it, or do we, completely just walk away from it? So,
right.
And it's a really good point. In light of the topic of this conversation, which is sort of the agency approach for the technology world, that in the agency, that go, no go is a critical step. Absolutely critical step. And saying no is often the right thing to do. And many times I've seen it lead to a better client relationship because they respect you more. They understand that you need to know them better. They allow you to do that. They give you other opportunities. Sometimes they beg you to bid because they really need that third bid. But it's not a bad thing to say no. It actually enhances your brand to a certain degree and helps your staff not get burned out. Because you're running after all these, trying to slay all these dragons, and most of them just aren't going to be slayed. So it's a really important step that needs to be scrutinized on a regular basis.
Spoken like a true operations person. I'm with you, Bill. Nope, we're not doing that one. What do you mean we're not doing it? No, not enough information. We're not doing it.
By the way, the other thing that Lindsay mentioned around educating the client, I've often found that production schedule, a good detailed production schedule, really helps to educate the client about what it takes to do what you're doing. And so it helps justify your pricing. If you have, this is our first step, this is our second step, we're going to be doing this, we're going to be doing that. And all of a sudden it feels to the client like, wow, they're getting a lot. And the price is not that bad as a result of it. It's one of the ways to really make it work.
No, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something that I've always believed firmly in, is if you write a good deliverable scope to where the client understands the process and the journey, they feel better about what they're paying for. And they understand it better, because when they're looking at competitive information, the first thing that may come to their mind is saying, they don't have a lot of detail here, so I'm not really feeling that I'm confident in, the number that they put in front of me, because I don't really understand what's going on. So the fact that you pointed that out, that in the creative world, in the agency world, that is a big beneficial piece, is good to know, good to hear. So, in billing, building proposal, the other interesting conversation that happens a lot of time is the pre-production details. You got the stuff that's related to the core scope of the work. Well, I should say not the pre-production, but more so the tracking of time. And in the agency world is super mission critical. And then in the live event production world, it's what time goes to the project and what time is just, part of going into the project, but not going to get built to the project. I find a lot of companies struggle with billing for all the time they feel they put into it. Is that common in the agency world? Is it in that world, is it really understood that this is all about time and effort, and there's going to be change orders for the amount of time and effort we put into it, because that's what this is all about, time and effort. I know this is your budget. We gave you a deliverable scope. These things took longer. Here's your change order. What's the environment like in the agency world compared to live event companies who are billing for on-show hours and maybe a couple of drawings, but then they're having tons of meetings with the client. They're designing things back and forth. The designs may change, and they're having those things that they don't bill for.
So, the way I've always operated and the way I worked with my team is that we would do a budget estimate up front of how much time and effort and energy that included pre-production time, that included on-site time, that included post-production wrap-ups, and that was the estimate we gave the client. And unless there was a scope change, we did not go back. And I have for sure had battles with with the powers that be over this at times, because especially if you're doing a project for the first time, you could significantly underestimate how much time that will take. But unless the scope changes, that was kind of like, I really drew a line in the sand that you don't go back and ask. That being said, it is critical that the client understands how much time and effort and energy it took. And so in the post-show debrief or wrap up or dinner or whatever, whenever it makes a sense, to let them know this is what it actually took. So that next year when you're doing this same project, they aren't surprised when the budget doubles.
Right.
So, and I also think there's some learning curve. I never liked to charge a client for learning curve. Like, they've taken a leap of faith and maybe left an incumbent and come to work with you instead. And so there are going to be things that the first year, the first kind of project with the client might take a little bit longer as you're both getting to know each other. And over time, you figure out how to staff differently or staff more efficiently, or have more junior people on the team versus senior. So there is a learning curve with the first project with the client that I don't ever think I never felt they should bear the burden of that. But yeah, no, it isn't like, to Bill's point earlier, there's an art and a science to budgeting it out. And then to make sure everyone's actually accounting for their hours. So even if a creative director only has 50 hours in the budget, you want to make sure that they're billing all of the hours it took, so that when you're looking back at the project and then you're looking to bill it again or budget again for next year, you know how to more intelligently create that budget.
There may be even an opportunity if, the creative director takes the 100 hours versus the 50 you budgeted, but you're able to save money in a deliverable on another part of the budget. You may be able to, at the debrief, have that conversation and say, gee, can we split this with the client? And, you get 25 hours covered of the extra time that it took. There's an understanding on the client side that we're trying to make money too. If the client doesn't want you to make money, you shouldn't have that client. So you can have those open, honest conversations and ask. You may not get it, obviously, but at least they know, hey, I just put in 50 hours more than I thought I was going to. So as Lindsay said, they'll learn about that for the next time. But there may be a way of getting some extra revenue come into the organization as a result.
I have always found, for the most part, I'm not going to say always, I've often found that clients really liked this budgeting approach because there were no surprises. So they knew if the fees say that it's $50,000, I will pay $50,000 unless there's a scope change. That being said, I have had clients who would say to me, well, maybe you've just over budgeted and you guys are making way more than, you're not billing all of this time. I want to be charged actual hours. And I said to them, I promise you don't want to be charged actual hours.
That's a very good answer.
Yeah, I will say,
the next project I would track it, and every single time we were either right on or you have very committed people in this industry who would stay up all night to get a project executed, and so the hours were almost always over what we'd budgeted, and so that was a really easy way to nip that conversation in the bud.
Yeah, all agencies absorb hours that are over and above what they're able to bill to their clients. You try and be within about 80%. It's a good guardrail of how many hours it took versus how much you actually billed. But there is this necessity to do stuff that you just can't necessarily charge all of what you're going to be doing to do it. And that's just part of the just part of the agency life.
Is there a number of hours or a percentage of hours in a project that you use as a cushion point, to where, for every project we're going to add a 5% cushion for overages that, unknown, it may be the first time, it may, the client may just not be as clear on the scope, and our deliverable details just are not as tight as we're comfortable with. So we're going to just build a standardized cushion, and that way we don't have to go put in a change order. It's already built in. Is there any type of numbers you use like that, Bill, that can be shared?
I think that most budgets try and have about a 5% contingency. I know that in equipment, sometimes that's even a little bit more. And the challenge with that is that you're making yourself more expensive. And you have to decide whether that is a competitive disadvantage. So it all depends, once again, the art of pricing is looking at it from a Gestalt point of view. What are all the factors that you're trying to accommodate? And if you're in a competitive environment, you're not an incumbent, and you put in a 5% contingency, you're probably shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah.
But if you know this client really well, and you know how they like to make changes, and you know that you don't want to charge them for it, putting in a 5% contingency probably makes a lot of sense. So it really depends upon where you're at as an organization with that client.
There are a number of advancements in technology. The hot ones I would say are virtual reality, augmented reality, projection mapping, anything to do with engaging the audience. What technologies have you seen that have you excited about storytelling and what agencies and creative companies are able to do?
For me, it's always been about immersing the client in the experience, or immersing, I should say, the audience in the experience. And I think that that's something that's been part of live events for a very long time, the desire to really create an environment that's all-encompassing, that takes over the audience's mind and releases their imagination into where you want them to go based upon the content you're delivering. So, that's the exciting thing about VR, is that it's all encompassing. You're taking over completely what they're seeing and what they're hearing. The challenge with VR is it's very isolating, and that you're not really part of a large group experience any longer. And if they can figure out a way to make that happen, that all the people around you are actually part of what you're seeing inside the goggles, then I think it's going to be an amazing tool. But what I've seen that really makes a huge difference is our ability now, compared to how hard it used to be, to do the 360 experience, to have it wrap around the entire room, to be overhead, to feel it in the seats, to be really immersed in that experience. That's the thing that I think is where technology has really been able to make huge advances and really make that happen a lot more easily and a lot more effectively.
Yeah, I would totally agree, Bill. And the only thing I think, other thing I'd add is just in terms of how companies are thinking about, this isn't necessarily a piece of technology, but how they're thinking about gamifying their event or incorporating kind of the second screen experience. And how are you leveraging that people have a second and sometimes third screen pre and post event. So I just, that we're really kind of embracing the way people are living, that you have a phone and a tablet and a computer, and I'm sitting with all of those while I'm, at work. We're kind of embracing how people are living and bringing that into the live event and extending the experience beyond just the parameters of the, the four walls of the event, I think is really exciting.
Totally agree.
Yeah, the virtual reality piece, Bill. I was watching Mark Zuckerberg do a demo of the Oculus Rift, and he put it on, and once he got inside of his virtual world, he had guest avatars of other people who had those on, and then he was able to do a call and send text and have this very interactive conversational communication, and they were able to go to different office environments and sit down and have discussions. And so the advancements, I think, are definitely coming to, I agree. I think, when you first put them on, and you're very isolated in that environment. So you forget that you're in, a realm and networking with a group of people to be part of this experience. But then now, they're showing that you can bring that experience in with you in this other world and move to other environments. So it's definitely progressing. And I think, with the investment that, these big companies are making in VR is what's caught the attention of the industry and saying, okay, this isn't going to be 3D to where, people are sitting with something on their face and supposed to be having this great experience. The major players are investing to make this really work. So be interesting to see what comes out of that from all of this investment and innovation around that.
Yeah, the key for me would be if you have somebody sitting to your left, if you turn with the goggles on and you see that person sitting, but they're in this environment,
right? Then
all of a sudden you're in a real world.
So, welcome to the Matrix.
Yeah.
Don't ask me how that happens.
In terms of learning more and understanding what's happening in the agency and creative world, what are some websites or conferences that people can attend to stay on top of their game or learn more about the latest trends that you share with people?
It's actually amazing to me how many different types of events there are and different almost niche events. You have the large experiential marketing summit, or BizBash does an annual event. You can obviously go to events like CES to really see the latest and greatest. But there's also very niche kind of innovation events, or Fast Company does kind of an innovation event. Like it's really, I've been amazed at how many different types. And that's where it's a critical for a marketing team and a business development team to really identify who are we targeting, because you could really kind of spend all your time going to these different creative, innovative events.
Yeah, and I also know that online there is all this ability to do find trends that are happening within the quote unquote experiential industry, and absorb what's going on that's out there that's really cool. So there's a site called Stylist that you can become a member of, and they proactively send you information around some of the really cool architectural things that are happening, or really cool event things that are happening, or really cool fashion things that are happening. And then you can go to their site and download imagery from it and utilize that for your proposals, or just get juice from it, just get excited about it. There's also, Faith Popcorn has this whole trend experience on her website that allows for a real understanding of how various segments of the population are getting information, and how they're getting the information, what they like in that information, what they're viewing, what their trends are. There's another site called Communication Arts that is a really cool. It's both it used to be a hard copy magazine, I assume it still is, and a soft copy website that once again has a very rich resource of visual and storytelling elements to it that just gives you new ideas and new ways of thinking about experiences going forward.
Cool. Well, what we're going to do now is what I call the final five on live, and it gets us out of industry conversation and into some other things. So outside of the industry, Bill, I'll start with you. Who's inspired you the most?
I guess, I am inspired by a man who was able to communicate so clearly, so broadly, and so insightfully. And it's John Lennon. And he is, to my mind, he is the ultimate communicator, and the one who really was able to lay out in very, very simple terms very, very complex ideas that resonate with everyone. So he's an inspiration for me.
And Lindsay, how about you?
I think for me, kind of staying in the business world, but I would probably say Warren Buffett. I think that he's clearly, he's obviously amazingly successful at what he does, but I think how he handles himself in a personal standpoint, the philanthropic nature of him and the humble nature of him, I find it really, inspiring. And I think he's just such a great example of how you can live, how you can be very successful and very innovative in his own way, yet still be humble and stay true to who you are.
This industry can take you around the world on somebody else's dime, which is just Lindsay, I'll start with you. What is one of your favorite places you've eaten while traveling?
Okay. So I think for me, a lot of times restaurants are all about like the experience and who you're with. And so I one time had, the show was over, we were all exhausted, and it was just a team dinner in Vegas at Nobu, and which is a sushi restaurant there. And obviously the food was amazing, but anyone that's listening to this pod knows that amazing, like you still have the adrenaline, but you're so exhausted. You've just been to war with the people around the table with you, and we probably could have been eating it like In-N-Out Burger, and it would have been just as good. But so that's the dinner that sticks out the most in my mind as my favorite meal I've had on the road.
Very cool. And Bill, how about you?
I was involved in a very complex project of installing broadcast sets in Beijing. And one night we just needed to take a break and get out. And we went to a place called Duc de Chine. And we had Beijing duck or Peking duck, I should say, at that restaurant. And it was an outdoor environment. And it was really great to just be able to relax with these people who have been working really, really hard. And to be able to have Peking duck in Beijing was amazing.
Very, very cool. All right. Favorite city traveled for business?
Well, for me, it has to be Sydney because I lived there for a year and I loved that. I love that city. I love that country. I love the people that are from there. It's an amazing place. I would encourage anybody to go visit.
And for me, I always, my best friend lives in Chicago, or she lived in Chicago. She's actually now in Sydney. But so I always loved getting the opportunity to go to Chicago so I could tack on a day before or after and spend some time with her.
I like Chicago too.
plus it's a great city.
That's right.
I love Chicago. It's a great city.
All right. Favorite movie of all time?
Oh man. I really struggle with this question. I'm like the agency that can't articulate what they do. These questions are harder. So if I'm going to go on the movie that anytime if it's on TV, I'll stop what I'm doing and I'll watch it no matter where it is in the movie. I've seen it, countless times, and I still tear up at the end. But I'm a sucker for Good Will Hunting. I think is my favorite movie of all time.
Love that scene with Robin Williams.
I know.
For me, and I'm not sure if it's so hard to isolate a single movie that's your favorite of all time. This could be because I am going to be taking a trip to Morocco very soon, but Casablanca really came to mind for me as being one of those movies, as Lindsay said, I will always stop and watch any scene in that movie.
Very cool. All right, last question here. If you didn't get in the AV industry, what would you be doing?
For me, I was a fledgling rock and roll star trying to so I probably not law, probably would have tried to be in the music business, maybe a music venue or something like that, because I don't think I was talented enough to actually be a rock and roll star.
And for me, I'm a huge sports fan. So I think I can see like in an alternative universe, I would have worked maybe for an NFL team or been in the marketing department there, or maybe something at ESPN and been up in Bristol. So I just have a feeling it would have been something sports related.
Very cool. Yeah, I would have been an aspiring baseball GM.
Good. I like it.
Yep.
I like it. Billy B.
Yep. Well, no, thank you so much for coming on the show. Can you share where can folks find you online, more about Tonic Consulting, yourselves, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn?
Sure. Yeah. So you can find us on our website at tonicconsultinggroup.com. And we're also on LinkedIn. And then Bill and I both have personal Facebook pages where you can find us as well.
Great. Well, thanks again. I will definitely be bringing you guys on in the future for some of those conversations. We'll take a whole show within themselves, but I'm glad with today's episode that companies got to learn, how, some best practices in building that agency approach to support their creative efforts, and some tips and tricks and tools, and hear your experience from your journey thus far. So glad to have that, and we'll definitely be talking in the future.
Well,
Great. Thanks so much.
No problem.